Her bag hit the wall when Rosa grabbed her arm. "Naomi, stop." She pulled free without slowing down. The hallway was dark. The east wing always went dim after 9, like the house itself was telling the staff to disappear, and Naomi moved through it like she'd mapped every step in her sleep. Because she had. She'd been planning this exit for 3 days. She knew exactly how many steps from her room to the staff corridor, exactly how long it took to cross the courtyard without being seen from the main security camera, exactly which gate the car service would pull up to if she booked them for the east entrance. She had a plan. She was good at plans. Plans were the only thing that had kept her functional since she landed in Seoul 14 months ago with 2 suitcases, her brother Marcus's hospital bills folded in her back pocket, and absolutely nothing else to hold on to. "Where are you going?" Rosa was still following, half running to keep up, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "It's past midnight." "Don't. Your shift doesn't end until—" "I quit, Rosa." The words landed in the corridor like something dropped from a height. Rosa stopped walking. Naomi didn't. She turned the corner, pushed through into the narrow passage that connected the east wing to the staff exit, felt the cold of the door handle, and Hak-soo was already on the other side, not blocking it. He wasn't that obvious. He was simply there, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders relaxed, standing at an angle that said he'd been told exactly which door she'd come through and approximately when. He had the kind of stillness that expensive security personnel cultivate over years, not aggressive, not warm, just present in a way that made the air around him feel slightly more controlled than the air everywhere else. He looked at her bag, then at her face. "Move," Naomi said. "He knows you're leaving." 3 words. She felt them land somewhere below her sternum, a cold pressure, small and precise, like a key turning in a lock she'd forgotten existed. She kept her face still. Her mother had taught her that in a kitchen in Atlanta when Naomi was 9 years old, never let them see the thing they can use against you, baby. Keep your face like Sunday morning. She'd spent 28 years practicing. She was good at it. Then he knows. She held Hak-soo's gaze, lifted her chin exactly 1 degree. "Move!" He looked at her for a long moment, not threatening, not apologetic, something more complicated than either, and then he stepped aside. She walked through. She made it as far as her room. She didn't understand why until she was standing in the bathroom doorway with her coat still on and her bag still on her shoulder, staring at the sink. The pregnancy test was where she'd left it 2 hours ago. Face down on the porcelain edge, next to her toothbrush, and the small bottle of shea oil she'd been rationing since she couldn't find her brand in Seoul. Face down like turning it over would change what it said. Like gravity worked differently when you weren't looking. She'd looked at it 4 times already. It didn't change. She turned away from the bathroom and sat on the edge of the bed, the narrow staff bed with the too firm mattress that she'd never fully gotten used to, and sat there with her coat on and her bag on her shoulder and her flight booked, and her car coming at 1 a.m. She had a plan. She was going to get on the plane and go back to Atlanta and have this baby in a city that knew her name and never speak a word about who the father was. She was going to raise this child near her mother and her aunties and the church on Peachtree where she'd grown up singing in the 2nd row of the choir. She was going to be fine. She had survived harder things than this. She had survived her father leaving and Marcus getting sick and the particular specific cruelty of watching someone you love need something you can't afford. She had survived all of that. She could survive this. She sat there in the quiet of a house that wasn't hers, in a city that wasn't her city, carrying something she hadn't planned for, and for one unguarded moment, in the space between one breath and the next, what she felt wasn't fear. It was grief, deep and specific and already formed, like it had been waiting for her to sit still long enough to feel it. Grief like she was already mourning something that hadn't died yet. Grief like she already knew the shape of what she was about to lose and was trying to decide if she could carry that shape for the rest of her life. She sat with it for exactly 4 minutes. Then she picked up her bag and walked back out. Stay with this story, because what Seung-woo does when he finds out will change everything you think you know about him. Jaeyeon was at the end of the east hallway, not waiting. Jaeyeon Baek did not wait for things. Things arrived to her, arranged themselves appropriately, and departed when she indicated. She was simply present at the end of the corridor in a pale silk robe and perfect posture, the kind of stillness that came from years of being the most composed person in every room she entered. She looked like a painting someone had hung there on purpose. She looked like she'd known Naomi was coming before Naomi had decided to come. Naomi slowed. Didn't stop. "Miss Carter." She stopped. Jaeyeon walked toward her unhurried, each step deliberate, and looked at the bag hanging from Naomi's shoulder, then at her face. She read both with the efficiency of a woman who had spent 8 years in a house where reading people quickly was a survival skill. "I know," she said simply. "Ma'am, I don't think. I'm not angry." A small pause, not hesitation, consideration. "I've been sitting with how I feel about this for the past hour, and I'm not angry. I'm not sure exactly what I am." "But it isn't that." Naomi said nothing. She kept her face like Sunday morning. "He's never chased anything in his life." Jaeyeon's voice was deliberate, each word placed with precision, like she was constructing something she'd thought through carefully. "You understand what I mean when I say that. Money comes to him. Loyalty comes to him. Territory, influence, fear, all of it arrives. He doesn't reach for things, Miss Carter. He has never had to learn how." She paused. "In 8 years, I have never once seen him move towards something the way he moved tonight. That doesn't. If he is moving tonight." Jaeyeon held her gaze with something that wasn't quite warmth and wasn't quite cold, something older and more honest than either. "I think you should understand what that means before you make your decision. With respect." Naomi kept her voice level and her chin up. "Whatever it means, it doesn't change what I have to do." Jaeyeon studied her for a long moment. Something shifted behind her eyes, not sympathy exactly, something that had been through more than sympathy and come out the other side of it. "No," she said quietly. "I don't suppose it does." She stepped aside. Naomi walked past her. She didn't look back. She had a rule about not looking back, another thing her mother had taught her, though her mother had meant it differently. The courtyard was cold at this hour and wide, and the security lights threw everything into hard shadow and harsh white. Naomi crossed it fast, her footsteps too loud on the stone, her breath visible in the night air. Haksu fell into step beside her. She hadn't heard him coming. She never did. He moved like a man who had spent years being useful without being noticed. "He's on his way back to the estate." His voice was neutral, informational, like a weather report. "That's his business. Miss Carter, I'm not his employee anymore." She kept her eyes forward. "I'm not anyone's anything anymore." "You don't have to follow me." "I know." He followed her anyway. They crossed the courtyard in silence, 15 steps, 20, the gate getting closer. The city beyond the estate walls glittered and hummed, indifferent and enormous, going about its midnight business. "Car is at the east gate," Naomi said, not to him specifically, to the air in front of her. "I know." A brief pause. "I booked it." She stopped walking, turned. "You booked it." "Asked me to." Haksu said it without inflection, which somehow made it worse. "This afternoon, before he knew." She stared at him. Before he knew. The words sat in the cold air between them and didn't move. She turned back toward the gate and kept walking. Faster now, not because she was more certain about where she was going, but because she was considerably less certain and she needed her legs to make the decision her mind kept second-guessing. Rosa found her at the persimmon tree. It stood in the southeast corner of the estate garden, old and gnarled, and somehow still alive after what the groundskeeper said were 40 years of Seoul winters. Naomi had discovered it in her first week, had come out at dawn, unable to sleep, homesick in a way that felt physical. Like her body was trying to walk back to Atlanta without consulting her. She'd found the bench beneath the persimmon tree and sat there as the sun came up over the hills and realized it was the only spot on the entire estate from which you couldn't see the main house. She'd eaten breakfast there every morning since. Sometimes lunch. Sometimes she just went there to remember that she was a person who existed outside the context of this place. Rosa sat beside her without asking. Without saying anything at all for a long moment. Just sat there in her staff uniform with her hands in her lap and let the silence be what it was. Naomi appreciated that about Rosa. She didn't rush at things. "Just tell me," Rosa said finally. Naomi's jaw tightened. "You packed yesterday." Rosa's voice was careful, measured. The voice of someone who had watched a friend hold something heavy for too long and was trying to offer a hand without making her feel weak for needing one. "You haven't eaten today. I checked the kitchen. You've been moving through this house for 3 days like someone who's already somewhere else." She paused. "What are you actually scared of?" "I'm not scared." Naomi. The way she said it, not sharp, not impatient, just present, cracked something open. "I'm scared he'll keep it." The words came out stripped of everything she'd been using to hold them in, all the composure, all the Sunday morning face, all the careful architecture of self-protection she'd been constructing for weeks. Just the raw thing underneath. "The baby. I'm scared that the moment he finds out there's a child, it becomes his. Bloodline, legacy, succession, whatever word men like him use for the thing they need to control." She stopped, breathed. And I become the woman who made that possible, something to be managed. Compensated, disappeared quietly into an arrangement that works for everyone except me. Rosa stared at her. Did he ever say that to you? Did he ever once treat you like? He didn't have to say it. Naomi's voice was flat, certain, the voice of someone who has made a decision and is trying to stop themselves from unmade it. I know how this ends, Rosa. I've always known how this ends. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I let myself forget for a while. That was my mistake. Naomi, I know how this ends. She stood up, picked up her bag. The staff door at the far end of the garden opened. Seung-woo walked through it, not through the main entrance with its wide marble steps and its double security doors and its cameras at every angle. Not through the formal corridor with the overhead lights and the housekeeper stationed at the end of it after 10 p.m. the staff door. The narrow one in the garden wall, the one with the rusted handle that caught if you didn't lift it slightly when you turned it. The one that had a flickering light above it that maintenance had been promising to replace for the entire 14 months Naomi had worked here. She had used that door every single day. She had never once seen Seung-woo Baek anywhere near it. He was in his outside clothes, black coat, long and dark, collar open despite the cold. The dragon tattoo was visible at his neck, the tail of it curling up behind his left ear. His face was what it always was, rough cut, closed, the kind of face that had been through things and come out without softening. The scar through his left brow. The jaw that looked like it had been set against something for a very long time, but he was breathing slightly harder than usual. He had moved fast to get here. He looked at the bag hanging from Naomi's shoulder. Then he looked at her face, and something moved across his expression so quickly she almost missed it. Something that looked, in that fraction of a second before he closed it off, like relief. Like he'd been afraid she'd already be gone. Rosa was gone. Naomi hadn't seen her leave. She just ceased to be present the way Rosa did when the situation had moved beyond what company could help. Seung-woo crossed the garden slowly. The stone path between them was maybe 20 feet. He covered it without hurrying and stopped a few feet away from her, close enough to talk quietly, far enough that she didn't feel cornered. He'd always been careful about that. She'd noticed it months ago and filed it away without examining it too closely. He looked at her bag again, then back at her face. You weren't going to say anything. He said it quietly. Not as an accusation, more like a man working out the geometry of something, trying to understand the shape of it. You were just going to leave. My employment here. Not talking about employment. His voice didn't rise, just settled like something heavy being put down, silence. The garden was very quiet. The city existed somewhere beyond the walls. She could feel it more than hear it, that low constant vibration of a million people going about their lives. But inside the walls, it was just the two of them and the persimmon tree and the bad light above the staff door. Why didn't you tell me? He said. There was nothing to tell. Naomi. Just her name, that was all he said. But the way he said it, low and deliberate, like a door being closed quietly in a room where something important was happening, did something to the wall she'd been building. Not broke it, just registered against it, made it feel slightly less permanent than it had 5 minutes ago. Telling you, she said, keeping her voice careful and her face still, would not have changed anything. That is not your decision to make. It is entirely my decision to make. Something changed in his face then, not anger. She'd seen his anger and it looked different from this. This was slower and quieter and somehow harder to hold eye contact with, and he was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. You decided what I would do, he said. Before I knew anything, before I had information, before I could make any choice at all, you made one for me. Men like you. Don't. His voice dropped lower, not louder, lower. Don't do that. Need information. You see something you want and you take it and you call that a decision. Naomi. The way he said it this time was different. Not a door closing. A hand pressed flat against something. Don't make me into something you invented so that leaving feels easier. The words hit her somewhere she hadn't protected. She looked away. The silence between them settled differently than it had a moment before. It wasn't the silence of an argument paused. It was the silence of something true that neither of them was ready to pick up yet, sitting there between them on the cold garden path, visible, waiting. She looked away first. She always looked away first with him. She'd never understood why until now. If you feel what Naomi's feeling right now, you already know this story is different. Don't leave. The truth is about to come out. I spoke to Jaeyeon. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. Like he'd made a decision about how much of himself he was going to put into the next few sentences. 3 days ago, Naomi turned back slowly. Because of the baby. He held her gaze steady, direct, the way he held eye contact when he needed someone to understand that what he was saying was the exact and complete truth and not a version of it. I didn't know about the baby 3 days ago. She stared at him. Arrangement ends. It has been not right for a long time. Jaeyeon knows it. I know it. Neither of us said anything because. He paused. Something moved across his face, not quite discomfort, something more like honesty looking for the right door. Because it is easier to stay inside something broken than to admit it was never built correctly to begin with. You're telling me. Naomi said it slowly, carefully, like she was carrying something fragile and didn't want to drop it. That before you knew about any of this, you had already. Yes. You want me to believe. I don't want anything from you right now. He said it simply, no edge to it. I'm telling you what happened. I'm giving you the truth because you deserve to have it before you make your decision. What you do with it, that's yours. That has always been yours. She had the sharp thing ready. She'd been building it for weeks, every beam reinforced, every angle covered, every possible entrance to her defended. It was a good structure. It would have held. You hummed, he said. She blinked. Every evening. He said it the way people say things they've been carrying for a long time, carefully, like they're not sure of the reception, but they've decided the carrying is worse than the saying. Around 7 o'clock, in this hallway, sometimes in the garden, something low, I never knew what it was. She didn't speak. Couldn't quite. I started leaving the study door open at 7 o'clock. A long pause. Every evening, for months, I told myself it was for the air. He stopped. The honesty in his face was an uncomfortable thing to look at, not because it was ugly, but because it was so clearly costing him something. I don't lie to myself well. It's a weakness. Structure she'd been building, all those weeks of careful reinforcement, every vulnerable place covered, came apart without a sound. Not dramatically. Just quietly, beam by beam, like something that had been holding against the wrong kind of pressure, finally recognizing it had been facing the wrong direction the entire time. You should have said something. Her voice fractured on the last word. She felt it fracture and couldn't stop it. Yes, you had months. You had so many. I know. You let me believe that I was invisible in this house. You let me think I was just. She pressed her hand against her chest, against the specific point where the grief had been living for days. Background, furniture. Someone who ironed shirts and made tea and didn't register as a full person in this space. While you were, she couldn't finish it. I know. His voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with its usual roughness. I know I know it wasn't fair, what I did or didn't do. That's not fair, Seung-woo. The first time. His name from her mouth directly to his face. He looked like it arrived somewhere. He was quiet for a moment, a real quiet, not strategic, the quiet of a man who had just received something and was sitting with the weight of it. No, he said finally. His voice was low and rough and completely without defense. It's not. You don't get to tell me this now. After all this time, after everything, you don't just get to. She stopped. Reset. You can't say these things now and expect them to fix what? I'm not trying to fix anything. He took one step toward her, careful, slow, giving her every opportunity to stop him. I'm trying to give you the truth, because you were about to walk out of here carrying a version of me that isn't real, a version you built so that leaving would hurt less. He stopped close enough that she could see the detail of the scar through his brow, the exact amber quality of the light in his eyes. And I couldn't let you go with that. She looked at him. This man, with his rough face and his scarred brow and his body covered in the history of every dangerous thing he'd survived, with his 20 years of learning to be immovable, with his silences that she'd spent 14 months learning to read like a second language. Why does it matter? She asked, and her voice came out softer than she intended. What version of you I take with me? Why does that matter? He looked at her the way people look at things they have no strategy for, no contingency, no protocol, just the bare fact of caring about something you didn't plan to care about. Because you're the only person in this house, he said quietly. Whoever walked into a room I was in and made me feel like the tattoos were the least interesting thing about me. The garden gate opened. Jaeyeon walked through it. Bags beside her, 2 of them, neat and organized, the same quality luggage she'd arrived with 8 years ago. A car was idling beyond the gate, its headlights cutting pale shapes across the stone path. She walked toward them, not toward Seung-woo, toward Naomi, and stopped in front of her. She looked at her for a moment without speaking, the way she'd looked at her in the hallway earlier, reading something. He is not easy, she said finally. Low and final, like the last line of something long. Like she'd been deciding whether to say it for a very long time, and had only just now decided that the saying mattered more than the cost of it. He doesn't know how to be small enough to let someone truly close to him. He doesn't know how to ask for the things he needs. He has spent so many years being the person that other people need things from that he never learned how. She paused. That is not an excuse. It is simply what is true. Naomi held very still. But I have been beside him for 8 years. Jaeyeon's voice didn't waver. And he has never once been dishonest with me. Not when honesty was convenient and not when it cost him something. Not once. She held Naomi's gaze a moment longer, passing something across the space between them, something that couldn't be named precisely but could be felt. That is rarer than you know. Don't mistake it for something ordinary. She turned, walked to the car with her 2 neat bags and her perfect posture. Didn't look back. The gate closed. Naomi stood at the east gate. The city was below and beyond Seoul in the deep part of the night, still lit, still moving, millions of lives going about themselves without any awareness of the 2 people standing in a garden on the hill trying to figure out what came next. The car service was waiting. She could see the headlights from here. Her bag was in her hand. Her flight was booked. Marcus's medical bills were still real. Her mother's voice on the phone last week was still real. The worry in it, the missing, the careful way she hadn't asked questions Naomi wasn't ready to answer. Everything that had brought her here was still true. She stood at the gate and felt all of it at once. The grief she'd been sitting with, and the fear she'd named to Rosa, and the things Seung-woo had said about the study door, and Jaeyeon's voice saying not once, and Hak-soo booking the car before anyone knew, and the test face down on the sink, and 14 months of 7 o'clock evenings in the east hallway. All of it, present, simultaneous, not resolving into anything clean. Hak-soo appeared beside her. He didn't approach like a man with an agenda. He stood beside her the way people stand beside each other when the thing being decided is too large for words to help with. Just present, just available, not pushing. They stood there in silence for a moment. The council won't accept this quietly. He kept his voice low. Not threatening, careful. Like a man who respects someone enough to tell them a hard thing clearly instead of softening it into something easier to swallow but less useful. A child born outside the recognized structure. Woman with no established ties. They will see it as a vulnerability and exposure. He paused. They will move against it, not immediately, but they will move. That's supposed to change my decision? No, he said it without hesitation. It's supposed to make sure that whatever decision you make it knowing what you're walking into. A pause. Courage deserves accurate information, that's all. Naomi looked out at the city, a long silence. The car service was still waiting. She thought about Atlanta, about Marcus, about her mother's kitchen and the smell of Sunday morning, and the church on Peachtree where she'd sat in the second row of the choir, and felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She thought about the east hallway at 7 o'clock. She thought about a study door left open every evening for months. She thought about a man crossing a staff courtyard in the middle of the night through a door he'd never used because she had a plan to be gone before he got back, and he'd moved fast enough that he almost wasn't too late. She set the bag down, not with ceremony, not with a speech or a declaration or any of the things that moments like this get in stories. She just set it down on the stone beside the gate and stood there without it. Then she turned and walked back through the staff door. Rosa was in the east hallway. She was standing near the persimmon tree bench, still in her uniform, clearly having not moved very far from where she'd been when everything happened. She looked up when Naomi came through. She looked at Naomi's empty hands. She nodded once, slow, quiet, the nod of a woman who had known all along and had the grace not to say so. Neither of them said a word. Naomi walked past her toward the main house. The study was dark except for the city light coming through the tall windows. Seung-woo was standing at the glass with his back to the door, not at his desk, not with the whiskey she'd seen him pour and not drink 100 times, just standing there in the dark with his coat still on, and his hands at his sides, and his shoulders carrying that invisible weight they always carried, the one that never fully left him even when everything else was quiet. Naomi stopped in the doorway. She stood there and looked at him and thought about all the evenings she'd brought the tea and noticed the way the room felt different with him in it, heavier, more present, like the air had more gravity, and had told herself it was just the nature of the space. The study was an important room. Of course it felt significant. She'd been telling herself things like that for 14 months. He didn't turn around. But something shifted in the set of his shoulders, barely perceptible, almost nothing, the way it always did when he registered her presence. She'd noticed it the first time around month 3 and had spent the following 2 months convincing herself she'd imagined it. She'd stopped trying to convince herself of that around month 5. "What do you actually want?" she asked. Not a challenge. Not an accusation. A real question, maybe the first completely real question she'd ever asked him, without any architecture of self-protection behind it. He turned around slowly. In the city light, he looked older than he did in the day, the lines of his face deeper, the scar through his brow more visible, the history written on him in ink and years more present. He looked like exactly what he was. A man who had survived a great many things and was not entirely sure what the surviving had been for. "I spent 20 years learning to survive." He looked down at his hands, both of them, the ink running across his knuckles and up his forearms, the dragon on the right, the tiger on the left, the characters his father had asked for before he died. "You learn what keeps you alive, what to watch for, what to never turn your back on, what to hold and what to release." He paused. "You become very skilled at it, and somewhere in the becoming you stop learning anything else." Naomi walked into the room. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see his face clearly in the dim light. "What does that feel like?" she asked. "When you stopped." He looked up at her. "Like living inside a very well-built room," he said. "Everything necessary, nothing missing, technically. And then," he held her gaze, "someone opens a window you didn't know was there, and you realize the room has been airless for years, and you're simultaneously grateful and terrified because now you know what you've been breathing." She looked at him for a long moment. "Going to have to learn how to say things earlier," she said. "You understand that?" Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Seung-woo Baek's face didn't do that easily, but something adjacent to it. Something that had been waiting a long time for permission to exist. "I understand that," he said. She crossed to the window. Stood beside him, close but not touching, the city spread out below them, Seoul glittering and relentless and vast, and looked out at it for a moment. She thought about what Hak-soo had said. The council. The people who were already going to have opinions about this, already going to have plans, already going to see a mixed heritage child in an unrecognized arrangement as something that needed to be solved. She thought about what Jaeyeon had said. Not once. She thought about her brother Marcus, who had looked at her on her last visit before Seoul and said, "Naomi, when are you going to stop managing everything and let something just happen to you?" She'd told him he sounded like a greeting card. He'd laughed and said maybe greeting cards are onto something. After a moment, something low rose in her throat. A hum. Barely anything, just breath shaped into something. A melody so quiet it was almost silence. Something she'd been singing since she was small enough to sit in the second row of the choir and feel the music move through the whole room. Seung-woo went completely still beside her, not tense. Still, the way things go still when they're receiving something. The city glittered below them. He didn't move. He stayed. Somewhere below, in a building on the south side of the city, in a room with no windows and a table long enough for 12 men, a phone rang. Someone picked it up on the second ring. A name was spoken. Then a question. Then a silence in which the answer was already understood by everyone present. A pen moved across paper. Beak. Unregistered heir. Foreign national. Uncontrolled variable. The man at the head of the table set the pen down. He looked at the name on the paper for a long moment. Then he looked up at the men around the table, 12 faces, 12 lifetimes of loyalty to a structure that had survived exactly because it had never allowed uncontrolled variables to exist for long. "Find out everything," he said. Quietly. He didn't say what happened after the finding out. He didn't have to. In the study on the hill, Naomi was still humming. Seung-woo was still there beside her. Neither of them knew yet what was already moving toward them in the dark. But for one moment, this specific and unrepeatable moment in the city light with the persimmon tree in the garden below, and the test still face down on the bathroom sink, and everything still uncertain, and nothing yet decided in the rooms where decisions were made by men with pens and long tables. It was just the two of them at the window. And she was humming. And he stayed. The council moves in Chapter 2, and they don't forgive what they can't control. But before you go, I need to know what you think. Did Naomi make the right call staying? Or did she just walk into the most dangerous situation of her life thinking it was something else? Drop your answer below, because people are going to disagree on this one, and I want to see it. Follow right now if you want Chapter 2, because it picks up exactly where that phone call ends, and nothing that happens next is gentle.